Kings were almost overthrown by their own subjects. This video uncovers 25 medieval uprisings that came within a whisper of reshaping our world. You will learn the hidden stories of the ordinary people and ambitious nobles who dared to challenge absolute power, revealing how fragile the crown truly was. What sparked a simple baker to lead an army, and how did a peasant's pitchfork nearly topple a throne? We will travel through centuries of defiance, from crowded city streets to remote mountain strongholds, exploring the courage and determination behind history's most dramatic near misses. What does it take for a society to finally say enough? London was in chaos. An army of commoners, armed with tools and sheer determination, had entered the city. At their head was a man named Wat Tyler, a figure who emerged from obscurity to lead one of the most direct challenges to royal authority England had ever seen. Their grievances were not just a list of complaints, but a radical vision for a new society. They demanded the end of serfdom, a system that bound people to the land and to their lords for life. They called for fair wages and the removal of the king's advisors. This was not a simple riot. It was a negotiation for fundamental human rights happening near the royal fortress. The young king Richard II, only 14 years old, agreed to meet them. Imagine the scene, a boy king facing a sea of determined, hopeful faces, all believing their moment for justice had finally arrived. Wat Tyler presented their charter directly to the monarch. The chronicler Jean Froissart, though no friend to the rebels, could not help but note their stunning discipline and the clarity of their demands. For a few tense days, it seemed the established order of nobility and peasantry might be permanently rewritten. The king, in a stunning move, agreed to their terms. He promised pardons and reforms. Hope surged through the rebel ranks, but then, during a second meeting, everything changed. A dispute erupted, and Wat Tyler was lost. With their leader gone, the movement lost its momentum. The king's promises were swiftly withdrawn, and the rebellion came to an end. Yet, the memory of those days when common people stood before their king and demanded their freedom refused to fade. It became a powerful story shared in villages and towns, a reminder that the power of the crown was not absolute. This first great rebellion, though it concluded in difficulty, proved that the collective voice of the people could shake a kingdom to its very foundations. That hope for a new world, so palpable in London, found a far more desperate echo across the English Channel. In France, the year 1358 was a time of profound humiliation and hardship. The French nobility, still reeling from a catastrophic military defeat at Poitiers where their king was captured, seemed to have lost their divine right to rule. The countryside was in turmoil, with lawless bands of unemployed soldiers roaming freely, and the common people, the peasants, bore the weight of immense difficulty. They were taxed into poverty to pay the king's ransom, their fields were burned, and their lords had failed in their most basic duty, protection. From this cauldron of despair erupted the Jacquerie, a firestorm of rage that took its name from the padded tunics, the jacque, worn by the common folk. This was not a planned rebellion with a clear leader like Wat Tyler. It was a spontaneous, terrifying explosion of fury from a people who had nothing left to lose. The jacque did not march to negotiate. They rose to dismantle the symbols of their oppression, attacking castles and manors with a ferocity that shocked the chroniclers of the age. For a brief, terrifying period, the nobility saw their world turned upside down as the very foundations of the feudal order, the unquestioned power of the knightly class, were shaken to the core. The response from the combined forces of the nobility was swift and overwhelming. The rebellion was suppressed with decisive force, its participants lost without any formal process. Yet the sheer intensity of the Jacquerie revealed something profound, a deep-seated class tension that simmered just beneath the polite surface of medieval society. This explosion from the most downtrodden was a stark reminder that desperation knows no bounds, a sentiment of profound grievance that would soon find a different, more organized voice in our next uprising. The desperation of the French peasantry had its parallel in the very heart of urban industry. Florence in 1378 was a city of stark contrasts, where the glorious art of the Renaissance was funded by the dedicated work of its many laborers. In the noisy, cramped wool workshops, the Ciompi carders and comers worked long hours for little pay, completely shut out of the political life of the city they helped enrich. They were the engine of Florence's wealth, yet they had no guild to represent them, no voice in government, and no protection from the changing decisions of the wealthy merchant elite who controlled everything. After years of this difficult situation, a poor harvest and a political disagreement among the upper classes created an opening. The Ciompi decided they would wait no longer. They poured from their workshops into the streets, not as a disorganized crowd, but as a new political force demanding recognition. Their movement was a masterstroke of urban organization. They did not just gather, they organized, forming their own official guild and persuading the city's ruling council to grant them political power. For several weeks, the government of one of Europe's most powerful cities was in the hands of its laborers. This new government passed measures for fair wages, granted tax relief to those in need, and ensured that the common people had a real say in their own governance. It was a breathtaking experiment in community-led democracy, a moment where the overlooked truly found their voice, but the established powers, the merchants and the major guilds, watched and waited. They regrouped, formed new alliances, and eventually used their greater resources and influence to peacefully end the Ciompi government. The movement was concluded, its hard-won agreements set aside. Yet, the memory of those brief weeks when the laborers guided the city never completely faded. It proved that the conversation between different parts of society was not just a rural phenomenon centered on fields and manor houses, but a discussion that could emerge with just as much energy in the crowded, prosperous cities of the medieval world. This urban energy, this desire for a voice from within the city walls, would find another powerful expression in a very different setting, where the focus was not on political rights, but on the very heart of a faith. Deep in the Baltic forests, a different kind of rebellion was taking shape, one where the fight for land was also a fight for a people's soul. The St. George's Night Uprising began in the spring of 1343, a coordinated movement where the native Estonians and local lesser nobles joined forces against their Danish and German rulers. This was not merely a protest against high taxes or difficult labor, though those burdens were immense. It was a direct challenge to a colonial system designed to erase their cultural identity, where their language, laws, and traditions were systematically suppressed by a foreign elite. Under the cover of darkness, using the dense woods as their ally, the rebels launched a series of stunningly effective assaults. They captured key strongholds, sending a shockwave through the entire Baltic region. For a moment, the entire colonial structure, which seemed so permanent, teetered on the edge of collapse. Chronicles from the Livonian Order, the very military force tasked with subduing the area, expressed genuine astonishment at the scale and coordination of the rebellion. The uprising revealed a powerful truth, that when a shared national spirit combines with deep social grievances, it can create a force capable of challenging even the most entrenched powers. But the established order had powerful allies. reinforcements arrived from neighboring German territories, and after 2 years of determined resistance, the rebellion was ultimately overwhelmed. Despite this outcome, the story of St. George's Knight refused to disappear. It became a foundational legend, a lasting symbol of the enduring will for self-determination. This powerful drive to control one's own destiny, ignited in the Baltic woods, would soon find a fiery new expression in a conflict that was not about land or lords, but about the very word of God. A new kind of rebellion was brewing in the hills of Bohemia, one forged not in a workshop or a field, but in the heart of a university. When the religious reformer Jan Hus was lost for his challenging teachings, his followers did not scatter in fear. Instead, they transformed his ideas into a rallying cry, igniting the Hussite Wars, a 15-year struggle that saw a nation of commoners and lesser nobles stand against the combined military might of the Holy Roman Empire. This was far more than a political revolt. It was a comprehensive revolution of the spirit. The Hussites insisted that ordinary people be allowed to share in communion, a direct challenge to the exclusive power of the Church. They called for services in their own Czech language and an end to the vast material wealth of the clergy. In doing so, they fused religious reform with a powerful sense of national identity, creating a proto-Protestant state that stood entirely outside papal authority. The empire responded with a series of crusades, vast armies sent to confront this challenge once and for all. But the Hussites, led by the brilliant and resourceful commander Jan Žižka, were ready. They pioneered revolutionary military tactics, using farm carts chained together to create mobile fortresses known as war wagons. From behind these rolling walls, their soldiers could repel armored knights and provide covering fire for their own counterattacks. Time and again, these improvised armies, often composed of farmers and townsfolk, humiliated the professional forces of the empire. The chronicles of the time record the astonishment and frustration of the Crusaders, who found their traditional methods of warfare utterly useless against this new kind of determined, innovative opponent. For over a decade, the Hussite state not only survived but thrived, its very existence a stunning rebuke to the medieval world order. Their success was so complete that they eventually forced the Council of Basel, the highest religious authority in Europe, to the negotiating table, winning unprecedented concessions. The movement demonstrated that when faith, national pride, and a desire for social justice combined, they could create a force powerful enough to defy empires and reshape the very boundaries of the possible. This potent fusion of belief and rebellion would find a different, equally dramatic expression in a land where the fight was not against a distant emperor, but against a king who seemed to have forgotten his own people. The same fire of faith that burned in Bohemia ignited a very different kind of rebellion in the misty highlands of Wales. A Welsh nobleman, Owain Glyndŵr, watched as English law systematically eroded the traditions and rights of his people, and a personal dispute over land became the catalyst for a national uprising. In the year 1400, with the support of prominent Welsh families, he was proclaimed Prince of Wales, a direct challenge to the English crown's authority. This was not a fleeting riot, but a meticulously organized movement for self-governance. Glyndŵr established a fully functioning Welsh state, complete with its own parliament, which met at Machyndrath. He pursued formal alliances with powerful rivals of England, including France, turning a local conflict into an international diplomatic affair. The chronicler Adam of Usk recorded the astonishment at Glyndŵr's early victories and his symbolic coronation, events that signaled a true restoration of native rule. For a few brilliant years, the Welsh people experienced a cultural and political renaissance, governing themselves by their own laws and traditions. Glyndŵr's genius lay in his ability to unite the often divided Welsh factions, from the mountain lords to the common folk, forging a shared cause rooted in the defense of their land and their liberty. His forces used the rugged Welsh terrain to their advantage, mastering tactics that challenged and confounded much larger English armies for over a decade. This sustained effort demonstrated a profound truth that a cause fueled by a powerful national identity could endure against overwhelming military power. Though the movement was eventually overcome by the vast resources of the English crown, and Glyndŵr himself faded from public view, his legacy never diminished. He became a symbol of the unyielding Welsh spirit, a reminder that the dream of self-determination, once awakened, is nearly impossible to extinguish. That same dream would soon find a new and unexpected champion, not in a prince or a noble, but in a humble baker from the crowded streets of a German city. While the Welsh fought for their homeland, a different kind of revolution was unfolding within the walls of a great empire. Thessalonika, the second city of Byzantium, fell under the control of a radical faction known as the Zealots. This was not a war of national liberation, but a fierce internal conflict that turned the city into a fortress of the common people. For 7 years, from 1342 to 1349, the Zealots governed Thessalonika as an independent commune, openly defying the emperor in Constantinople. Their uprising was fueled by a deep resentment of the wealthy aristocracy, who were seen as hoarding the city's riches while the merchant and working classes struggled. The Zealots enacted a stunning policy, seizing the property of the rich and redistributing it among the city's less fortunate. Imagine a city where the palaces of the elite were thrown open, their stored goods and wealth shared with the community. This was a direct challenge to the very idea of inherited privilege and imperial hierarchy. Historical accounts from the time, though written by their opponents, cannot hide the sheer surprise of this organized popular government. The Zealots created their own courts, raised their own militias, and managed the city's defenses with a determination that baffled the imperial court. This was a rare and remarkable experiment in self-rule, a glimpse of a society where power flowed not from a distant crown, but from the collective will of its citizens. It proved that the desire for a fairer system was not confined to Western Europe, but was a universal force. The empire, however, could not accept this challenge forever. After a long and difficult period, imperial forces finally reclaimed the city, and the Zealot commune was brought to a close. Yet, its brief existence stands as a powerful testament to the revolutionary potential simmering within medieval cities, a clear reminder that even the most ancient empires were vulnerable to the demands of their own people. This internal pressure from below would soon be matched by a challenge from within the highest circles of power, where a king's own family would turn against him. The sound of steel on the field of Kortrijk was not just a battle, it was a statement. An army of Flemish townspeople, weavers and craftsmen armed with long pikes and a fierce determination to protect their way of life, faced the finest of French nobility. This was the Battle of the Golden Spurs, a confrontation that would defy every expectation of medieval warfare. The Flemish cities like Bruges and Ghent were economic powerhouses, their cloth trade weaving fortunes that rivaled kingdoms. But this very wealth drew the attention of the French crown, which sought to impose its direct rule and oversee their riches. For the people of Flanders, this was not merely a political dispute, it was a struggle for their hard-won autonomy, for the right to govern their own affairs and protect their economic freedom. When the French army arrived, a glittering force of heavily armored knights confident of an easy victory, the Flemish militias stood their ground. They chose their terrain wisely, a field cross-cut with streams and ditches that hampered the dreaded cavalry charge. Then they did the unthinkable. As the knights advanced, the Flemish pikemen held firm, using their long weapons to create a wall of steel that stopped the French horsemen in their tracks. In the intense close-quarters fighting that followed, the disciplined townsfolk overcame the knights, a stunning reversal of the established feudal order. The chronicles of the time record with awe the symbolic piles of golden spurs gathered from the field, giving the battle its legendary name. This victory secured Flemish independence for a generation, but its impact echoed far beyond their borders. It proved that communal courage and innovative tactics could challenge the idea of knightly invincibility, sending a powerful message to every corner of Europe that ordinary people, when united by a shared cause, could stand against the greatest military powers of the age. This demonstration of urban strength, born from the looms and forges of a commercial society, reveals a world where the battlefield was becoming a new arena for social change. The disciplined courage of the Flemish townsfolk revealed a new kind of power, but another uprising would soon prove that fervent belief could be an equally potent and far more volatile force. In the spring of 1251, a different kind of army began to form in the French countryside. They were not knights or merchants, but shepherds and landless laborers, calling themselves the Pastouro. Their mission was born from a shared sense of shock and devotion. King Louis IX had been captured on crusade, and they believed it was their divine duty to rescue him. What began as a popular pilgrimage, a crusade of the poor, quickly warped into something far more dangerous. As this vast, disorganized crowd moved from village to village, their focus shifted from a distant Holy Land to the powerful institutions right in front of them. They began to see the local clergy and royal officials not as allies, but as the very source of the problem, accusing them of failing in their spiritual duties. The shepherds turned their staves and tools not on a foreign enemy, but on monasteries and church properties, confronting symbols of an authority they felt had betrayed them. Contemporary chroniclers, often monks themselves, recorded their disbelief at the sight of these humble laborers openly challenging the church's hierarchy. This was not a rebellion with a list of political demands. It was a raw, emotional explosion of millenarian hope and deep-seated class frustration. The movement's rapid spread showed how quickly disillusionment with the established order could ignite, especially when fueled by a belief in a higher purpose. The response from the crown and nobility was predictably swift and overwhelming. The unofficial crusade was forcibly concluded, its participants lost without any formal agreement. Yet the brief, fiery passage of the Pastouro left a lasting mark. It was a stark demonstration that faith could be a language of protest, and that the desperation of the rural poor could manifest as a powerful, if short-lived, challenge to the very pillars of medieval society. This potent mix of spiritual fervor and social grievance would not disappear. It would soon find a new and equally dramatic expression in a conflict that was not about a king's capture, but about a queen's right to rule. The Hungarian plains became the stage for a rebellion that revealed the deepest tensions within feudal society. A crusade, initially blessed by the Pope to confront the Ottoman Empire, was unexpectedly transformed into a widespread popular uprising. The man who guided this remarkable shift was Gyaörgy Dózsa, a shapely knight who recognized the profound yearning in the faces of the common people gathered for a holy cause. They were not just answering a religious call, they were seeking relief from the heavy burdens of their daily lives and the vast privileges held by the landed elite. Under his leadership, a great multitude turned its focus away from a distant conflict and toward the structures of power close to home. Their hopes were clear and far-reaching, an end to all traditional obligations and the vision of a new social order founded on shared dignity. The movement's own statements, preserved by chroniclers, expressed this dream of a world reimagined. For a few intense weeks, it appeared they might achieve it. Dózsa's followers secured key towns and strongholds, their progress sending a wave of alarm through the highest circles of society. The established way of life, which had seemed as unchanging as the landscape itself, was suddenly being questioned by the very people who sustained it. The noble response, once they organized, was swift and overwhelming. They gathered their own forces and met the rebel army in a final, decisive encounter. The uprising was brought to an end, and its conclusion was marked by a response so severe it was meant to discourage any future thoughts of resistance. Jacquerie Dózsa's story became a sobering lesson about the price of confronting the powers of the age. Yet, the legacy of that bold endeavor and its profound aspirations could not be so easily forgotten. It left a lasting impression on the kingdom, a powerful reminder of the courage shown by those who dared to envision a different way of life. Far from the centers of imperial power, in the misty hills of Galicia, a different kind of resistance was taking root. Here, the struggle was not led by a single charismatic figure, but by the collective will of entire communities. The Irmandiño revolts were massive, organized uprisings where peasants, artisans, and even some lower-level churchmen formed powerful brotherhoods, known as Irmandades, to address the challenges posed by the local nobility and clergy. These were not chaotic riots but disciplined movements with clear goals, aiming to transform a system many felt was unjust. The lords and bishops had long imposed heavy taxes and unpredictable legal decisions, and the brotherhoods rose with a simple, powerful demand: an end to this situation and the establishment of fair laws for everyone. What makes these movements so remarkable is their sheer level of organization. The Irmandades functioned almost like a parallel government, collecting their own funds, raising their own forces, and even overseeing justice in the areas they influenced. For a time, they effectively replaced the older feudal courts with their own community-based systems, a stunning achievement of grassroots political action. Contemporary petitions, some of which still survive, detail their vision for a society built on fairness rather than inherited privilege. They did not seek to overthrow the king, but to appeal to his authority over the heads of their immediate local leaders, hoping the crown would support their call for reform. This sophisticated strategy showed a deep understanding of the political landscape. The first great revolt in 1431 set a powerful precedent, and the second, even larger movement in 1467 proved the Brotherhood's resilience. Though both efforts were ultimately met by the combined military strength of the nobility, their impact was permanent. They had so thoroughly questioned the power of the local lords that the monarchy was able to step in and strengthen its own control over the region, using the events as a reason to curb noble independence. The Irmandiños demonstrated that when common people unite with a shared purpose and a clear structure, they can shift the foundations of even the most rigid social order, leaving a legacy that rulers themselves would later use to reshape a kingdom. In the lawless French countryside, a different kind of conflict simmered for decades. The Tuchin movement was not a single dramatic confrontation, but a prolonged, shadowy struggle born from the utter collapse of order. The 100 Years' War had left vast regions like Auvergne and Languedoc scarred and vulnerable, their fields burned and their communities shattered by roaming bands of unemployed soldiers. From this cauldron of hardship emerged the Tuchins, a name that would become linked with a persistent grassroots resistance. They were not a formal army but a loose network of peasants, displaced farmers, and former fighters who had lost everything. Their approach was one of survival and subtle defiance, using the dense forests as their sanctuary and staging ground. Chronicles from the period describe their sudden, sharp actions against the very symbols of their struggle, the tax collectors sent to take what little they had left and the nobles who had failed to protect them. Even church officials were not spared, as the Tuchins saw the established institutions as part of the system that had abandoned them. This was a rebellion without a central leader or a published charter, a form of social resistance where the line between desperate acts and political protest was intentionally blurred. For nearly 20 years, this low-intensity conflict drained the royal treasury and challenged the state's fundamental claim to a monopoly on force. How do you confront an enemy that melts back into the landscape, whose grievances are shared by the local population? The Tuchins demonstrated that when formal structures fail, resistance can become a way of life, a stubborn, enduring force that proves just as challenging to authority as any organized army on an open field. This legacy of decentralized defiance, born in the woods of France, would find a powerful echo centuries later in a very different empire, where the struggle was not for survival, but for the soul of a faith. The chaotic energy of the Tuchins found a startling echo in the very heart of the French capital. Paris in 1413 was a city on edge, caught in the intense rivalry between the Burgundian and Armagnac factions, vying for influence over the throne during a difficult period for the crown. From this political storm emerged an unexpected force for change, the Butchers' Guild, led by a man named Simon Cabochien. This was not a peasant uprising but a takeover by the city's own prosperous merchants and artisans, who were deeply dissatisfied with a government they viewed as corrupt and unaccountable. The Cabochians, as they were known, did more than just protest. They took control of the city itself. For several months, they were the authority in Paris, detaining officials they considered corrupt and implementing a radical vision for governance. Their most lasting contribution was the Cabochien Ordinance, a comprehensive document that proposed wide-ranging reforms to the monarchy's finances and administration. It was a blueprint for a more transparent and less arbitrary form of royal power, a remarkable insight into the political thought of the medieval middle class. This was not a call to abolish the monarchy, but to make it answerable to its people in new and formal ways. Yet their experiment in urban rule was fragile. Their alliance with the Burgundian faction proved unstable, and when popular opinion turned against their severe methods, their Armagnac rivals saw an opening. The movement was suppressed, its reforms set aside, but the ideas within that ordinance did not simply vanish. They reappeared in later political struggles, showing that the demand for accountable power, once expressed so clearly from the streets of Paris, could not be permanently quieted. This bold move by urban craftsmen showed that the challenge to royal authority could come not just from the countryside or the battlefield, but from the guild halls and market squares of a kingdom's greatest city. Even the highest nobility could find itself pushed to the brink of rebellion. In the year 1258, a group of England's most powerful barons confronted King Henry III, not with drawn swords in a field, but with a document in the royal hall. They were not landless peasants, but landowners and warriors who had grown weary of what they saw as the king's poor management and his favoritism toward foreign advisors. Their leader was Simon de Montfort, a man of immense ambition and principle, who argued that the crown's power should not be absolute. The result of this confrontation was the provisions of Oxford, a revolutionary agreement that required the king to accept a new form of government. A council of 15 barons was created to guide and in many ways oversee the king's major decisions. This was a constitutional rebellion, an attempt by the elite to legally bind the monarch and establish a system of shared governance. For the first time, the principle was etched into law that the king ruled not by divine right alone, but with the advice and consent of his leading subjects. This fragile balance held for a few years, but the underlying tensions remained. The conflict soon escalated from the council chamber to the battlefield. At the Battle of Luz in 1264, de Montfort's forces achieved a stunning victory, taking both King Henry and his son, Prince Edward, into their care. With a royal family under his influence, de Montfort effectively became the ruler of England. His next move was perhaps his most enduring legacy. In 1265, he summoned a parliament. But this was not a gathering of only barons and bishops. He included knights from the shires and, crucially, representatives from the major towns. This was the first time commoners were formally included in a national assembly, a monumental step toward a representative government that truly reflected the community. For a year, this model of governance functioned, a glimpse of a political future where power was more broadly distributed. Yet Prince Edward escaped and rallied the royalist forces. The rebellion was ultimately overcome at the Battle of Evesham, where Simon de Montfort met his end. The royal cause was restored, and the provisions of Oxford were formally set aside. But the ideas they represented proved impossible to erase. The rebellion had planted a seed, the powerful notion that governance was a matter of negotiation and law, not just royal command. This struggle from the very top of society revealed that the fight for accountability was not confined to the fields and city squares. It could begin in the throne room itself. While the English barons were forging new laws in their halls, a different kind of freedom was being defended with pikes and passion in the watery marshlands of Frisia. Here, along the North Sea coast, society was organized in a way that would have seemed impossible to most of medieval Europe. There were no dukes, no counts, no feudal lords demanding service. For centuries, the Frisians had lived as a confederation of peasant republics, their lives governed by communal laws and representative assemblies where every free man had a voice. Their entire identity was built around a single, powerful idea they called the Frisian freedom. This was not just a phrase, it was a way of life, a guarantee that they would bow to no prince. This cherished liberty faced its greatest challenge in the 15th century from Charles the Bold, the ambitious Duke of Burgundy, whose dream was to weave their independent lands into his growing, centralized state. He sent his professional army expecting a swift surrender. What he found was a people who knew every hidden path through the treacherous bogs, every stream that could slow a knight in full armor. The Frisian farmers and fishermen transformed into a formidable force, using their intimate knowledge of the landscape to surprise and confound the outsiders. They did not fight for a king or a new lord, but for the right to remain who they were. In a stunning confrontation, these determined defenders turned back the Burgundian forces, handing Charles a difficult setback. Their success was celebrated in their own laws and songs, a testament to a society that had chosen cooperation over inherited hierarchy. The endurance of Frisian freedom stands as a powerful reminder that the medieval world was not a monolith of kings and serfs. Alternatives existed, proving that the human desire for self-governance could flourish even in the most unexpected places. In the swampy lowlands along the Weser River, a community of free peasants made a stand that would echo for generations. The people of Stedinger had long enjoyed a life of autonomy, farming the difficult, waterlogged soil they had painstakingly reclaimed from the marshes. They answered to no local lord, governing their own affairs according to ancient custom. This cherished independence was suddenly threatened when the Archbishop of Bremen, seeking to expand his territorial power, demanded they pay heavy taxes and submit to his full religious and political authority. For the Stedingers, this was not merely a financial burden, it was an assault on their entire way of life. They refused, and for 30 years they waged a defiant war from their watery homeland. These farmers were not trained soldiers, but they knew every hidden path through the bogs, every patch of firm ground invisible to an outsider. When the archbishop sent his armies of armored knights to compel their obedience, the peasants used the land itself as their greatest weapon. They lured the heavily equipped soldiers into the marshes where horses foundered and men struggled, turning the knight's greatest strength into a profound disadvantage. Time and again, the professional armies were humiliated by these determined defenders, a stunning proof that sheer will and intimate knowledge of one's home can challenge the finest military technology of the age. Frustrated by their inability to subdue the rebellion, the church took a drastic step, declaring a formal crusade against the Stedingers, framing their struggle for freedom as an act of heresy. This call to holy war brought a massive new army to their doorstep. In a final, tragic confrontation, the peasants were overwhelmed. The resistance was brought to a close in a manner that shocked contemporaries and cemented the story in local legend. Yet, the memory of their 3-decade-long stand became a powerful symbol. Their fight was a clear, early signal of the tension between local self-determination and the centralizing forces of both feudal and religious power, a poignant reminder of what can be lost when larger institutions demand uniformity. The struggle for a way of life found its final, dramatic act not in a city or a marsh, but in the rain-swept hills of Munster. For the Gaelic lords of Ireland, the world was closing in. The Desmond rebellions were a final, heartfelt effort to preserve a culture that had flourished for centuries, a society built on ancient laws, bardic poetry, and a deep connection to the land. The Fitzgerald Earls were not mere rebels, they were the guardians of this fading world, leading a resistance that was as much about faith and custom as it was about power. The English Tudor state, pushing its own vision of a centralized Protestant kingdom, saw their traditional autonomy as a challenge to be overcome. This was a collision of two eras where the medieval Gaelic order made its last stand against the machinery of the modern state. The Fitzgeralds forged alliances with other Gaelic families and reached across Europe, securing promises of support from Spain and the papacy, turning a local conflict into an international crisis. For years, their forces challenged the English crown, reclaiming vast swaths of the Irish countryside and bringing the entire colonial project to the brink of failure. The old ways, it seemed, still had spirit left in them, but the resources of a rising empire are vast. The response was overwhelming and decisive. The rebellion was suppressed, its leaders gone, and the land itself was transformed through a great plantation where new settlers arrived to reshape the very landscape of Munster. The society the Desmonds fought to protect, with its intricate Gaelic customs and networks of loyalty, was fundamentally altered. Yet the memory of that determined, decades-long resistance endures. It stands as a poignant turning point, the moment the medieval world in Ireland reached its close and a new, more complex chapter began. While kings and nobles battled for thrones, a quieter struggle was unfolding for the most basic of rights, the freedom to choose a different path. In the rocky hills of Catalonia, a class of laborers known as the Remensas lived under the weight of what were called the evil customs. These were not simple taxes but laws that tied them and their children to the land for generations, with no right to depart or to claim the soil they cultivated with their own hands. Their name came from the redemption fee required if they ever sought to purchase their liberty, a sum so immense it was meant to be forever out of reach. For years, this arrangement seemed as unchangeable as the mountains themselves. But then, the Remensas decided they would wait no longer. They organized not as a fleeting crowd, but as a disciplined movement with a clear legal purpose, the complete abolition of these unjust practices. They formed their own militias, secured key strongholds from the nobility, and turned the countryside into a symbol of their resolve. Their timing was crucial, as their movement became part of a wider civil conflict over the future of the Crown of Aragon. The competing factions, each in need of support, found they could not overlook the determined presence of the peasant forces. The Remensas skillfully navigated this complex political landscape, offering their aid to different sides while always holding to their own fundamental goal. For over 2 decades, through changing alliances and unmet promises, they maintained their steady effort. Their persistence was their most powerful asset. Finally, in 1486, their long campaign reached its turning point. King Ferdinand II, seeking a stable and loyal kingdom, issued the Sentencia Arbitral de Guadalupe. This royal decree did not merely suggest a compromise, it granted the Remensas everything they had sought. The evil customs were formally abolished, laborers were now free to leave their lands, and the burdensome redemption fees were eliminated. This was a remarkable, definitive achievement. In a world where most such uprisings were met with overwhelming force, the success of the Remensas stands as a profound exception. It demonstrated that through steadfast organization and a focused legal approach, even the most established powers could be persuaded to change. The very law of the land had been rewritten not by a noble sword, but by the collective will of those who nurtured the soil. The sun-baked hills of Languedoc sheltered a world apart. Here, in the south of France, a vibrant culture flourished with its own language, the Languedoc, and a spirit of independence that deeply concerned the powers in Paris and Rome. At the heart of this distinct society was a religious community known as the Cathars, whose beliefs presented a fundamental challenge to the medieval church. They viewed the material world as separate from the divine, a perspective that led them to question many established doctrines and hierarchies. To the northern French monarchy and the papacy, this was more than heresy, it was a challenge to the very unity of Christendom. In 1209, Pope Innocent III declared a crusade, not against a foreign land, but against fellow Christians in the south. What followed was a 20-year-long conflict that was both a holy war and a determined campaign of political consolidation. The crusading armies, led by northern barons, moved into Languedoc with a singular purpose: to end the Cathar faith and bring the independent region under control. The local nobility, like the powerful Count of Toulouse, faced an impossible choice: abandon their people and their culture or stand with them in defiance. Many chose to stand. The resistance found its heart in a series of nearly unassailable fortresses perched on jagged mountain peaks. The siege of the great city of Toulouse became a legendary episode of communal courage, where every citizen, from knight to tradesperson, contributed to the city's defense for months on end. When open warfare became impossible, the resistance faded into the countryside, waging a long and draining campaign from the forests and hills they knew so well. They were not just defending a faith, they were fighting for their right to be different, for their songs, their laws, and their ancient liberties. The cost of this defiance was immense. The crusade ultimately succeeded in its primary task. Languedoc was incorporated into the French crown, its distinct culture diminished, and the Cathar faith was gradually dissolved. The world lost a unique spiritual tradition, and a vibrant corner of Europe was made to conform. This profound chapter stands as one of history's most sobering examples of how the language of faith can be used as a tool for political consolidation, and a reminder of what can be lost when the demand for unity overshadows the beauty of diversity. The clash of arms in Germany was not between peasants and princes, but between two visions of the past and future. In the Rhineland of 1522, a class of imperial knights found their world growing smaller. These were not landless warriors, but a proud lower nobility, their castles dotting the hills, their ancient right to bear arms for the emperor now challenged by the rising power of territorial princes and wealthy prince-bishops. Their leader, Franz von Sickingen, was a celebrated mercenary captain who saw a path to reclaim their fading relevance. He framed their rebellion as a holy mission, aligning their cause with the explosive new ideas of Martin Luther. For these knights, religious reform and the defense of their own liberties were two sides of the same coin. They turned their military skill, honed in generations of warfare, against the very church authorities they saw as corrupt and oppressive, laying siege to the territories of the Archbishop of Trier. For a moment, it seemed the old knightly order might reassert itself by force, but the response from the United Princes was swift and overwhelming. They gathered their modern armies and advanced with heavy artillery, a tool the knights could not match from their stone fortresses. Von Sickingen's own castle was stormed and he was lost. The rebellion collapsed, a final, dramatic effort by a warrior class that had outlived its time. Their failure was a clear signal. The age of the freelance knight, loyal only to a distant emperor and his own code, was over. The future of power in Europe would be built by centralized states with organized armies, not by individual castles and their proud, independent lords. This internal fracture among the elite revealed that the tremors of the Reformation were reshaping not just faith, but the entire structure of political loyalty itself. Scotland's hills echoed with a different kind of defiance, one that would forge a nation. After the passing of William Wallace, the dream of an independent Scotland seemed to fade, but a nobleman named Robert the Bruce saw a different path forward. His was not a sudden uprising, but a calculated, relentless campaign that turned a personal claim to the throne into a national crusade for survival. Crowned king in 1306, Bruce began his reign not from a palace, but as a figure moving through the very wilderness he sought to liberate. He mastered the art of guerrilla warfare, his forces striking English supply lines and outposts with lightning speed before vanishing back into the misty glens. This was a conflict of patience and endurance where the land itself became his most powerful ally. The defining moment came on the field of Bannockburn in 1314. There, Bruce's smaller, highly motivated army faced the full might of the English host. The Scottish schiltrons, dense formations of spearmen, stood like a forest of steel against repeated cavalry charges, turning the English advantage in heavy knights into a fatal weakness. The victory was not just tactical, it was a profound psychological triumph that galvanized the Scottish people. Yet, Bruce understood that battles alone would not secure a kingdom. He complemented his military success with shrewd diplomacy, persuading the papacy to recognize Scottish sovereignty and tirelessly building support abroad. This combination of unstoppable force and careful statecraft culminated in the Treaty of Edinburgh-Northampton in 1328, where a weary England formally acknowledged Scotland as an independent kingdom and Robert the Bruce as its rightful king. The Bruce Rebellion stands as a rare, complete success story. It triumphed because it seamlessly wove together the strategic genius of a determined leader with the deeply held hopes of a people, proving that even the most powerful empire could be challenged when a nation finds its unified voice. A new kind of rebellion was brewing, one fought not with pikes on a muddy field, but with ideas passed hand to hand. In the quiet corners of England, the Lollard movement began to question the very pillars of authority. Its inspiration was a university scholar, John Wycliffe, who proposed a radical idea that every person should be able to read the scriptures in their own English tongue. This was far more than a linguistic preference. It was a direct challenge to the Church's exclusive control over spiritual truth. Lollard preachers, often traveling quietly from town to town, argued that a wealthy, powerful clergy had strayed from the true path of the faith. They saw the vast lands and ornate rituals as a distraction from a simpler, more personal connection with the divine. Their critique resonated deeply with merchants, skilled artisans, and even some gentry who were weary of the Church's immense political and financial influence. The movement's power lay in its accessibility. Its ideas spread through sermons in market squares and through handwritten, portable books that could be read and discussed in homes and workshops. This was a rebellion of the mind, and for a time it seemed it might reshape England from within. But when words are deemed too dangerous, the response is often forced. The movement's revolutionary potential became starkly clear in 1414, when a prominent knight, Sir John Oldcastle, attempted to translate those ideas into direct action. He organized a plot to seize the young King Henry V and force the implementation of Lollard reforms. This was no longer a philosophical debate, it was a planned coup. The conspiracy was uncovered and the uprising was swiftly and decisively overcome by the crown. Yet, the suppression of the Lollards could not erase the questions they had planted. Their demand for a faith that was understandable and accountable to the common person did not disappear. It simply went quiet, its texts hidden, and its discussions held in secret for generations. These suppressed ideas would later find fertile ground, influencing the great religious upheavals of the following century. The Lollards proved that the most enduring rebellions are sometimes those that first capture the imagination, demonstrating that a challenge written on a simple page can be as formidable as any army. The north of England rose in a single, unified voice. In the autumn of 1536, a vast and unlikely army of tens of thousands gathered, from great lords and parish priests to farmers and tradesmen, all marching under the banner of the 5 wounds of Christ. This was the Pilgrimage of Grace, the most significant popular uprising Tudor England would ever witness. Their grievance was not with a tax or a bad harvest, but with the king himself, Henry VIII, and his radical remaking of their world. His break from the church in Rome and the sudden, shocking closure of the monasteries struck at the very heart of their community and their faith. For these northern communities, the local monastery was not just a religious house, it was the center of charity, a source of employment, and a guardian of the old ways. The king's new policies felt like an assault on their entire way of life, a rapid and disruptive change imposed from a distant capital that did not understand their needs or respect their traditions. The Pilgrims, as they called themselves, were remarkably disciplined and organized. They drafted a detailed list of requests, demanding the monasteries be restored and the old religious practices respected. They were not a chaotic mob, but a formidable political and military force that brought the king's own government in the north to a complete standstill. Faced with such a massive and unified protest, Henry had little choice but to negotiate. He offered a royal pardon and promised to listen to their concerns through a proper parliament. Trusting their king's word, the Pilgrims peacefully disbanded and returned to their homes, believing they had won their cause through sheer force of numbers and conviction. It was a tragic miscalculation. Once the rebel army had dispersed, the king revealed his true intentions. He went back on his promises and launched a swift and overwhelming response. The leaders of the pilgrimage were pursued and met with a difficult fate, a stark lesson in the dangers of trusting a ruler who felt his power had been challenged. The Pilgrimage of Grace stands as a powerful testament to the enduring strength of tradition and community. It showed that even the most absolute monarch could be forced to the negotiating table by the collective will of his people, and its difficult conclusion revealed the high cost of resisting the relentless march of a centralizing state. That fragile hope for a restored kingdom burned brightly on the Balkan frontier. In the early 1440s, the Serbian leader Đurađ Branković watched the Ottoman Empire, his nation's powerful overlord, navigate a moment of internal difficulty. For a ruler determined to reclaim his people's sovereignty, this was not a time for patience, but for a calculated, daring gamble. Branković forged a crucial alliance with the Hungarian military leader John Hunyadi, a commander famed for his crusading spirit. Together, they launched a movement with a single, clear objective: to reshape the terms of Ottoman suzerainty and restore full Serbian independence. This was more than a local revolt. It was a coordinated Christian effort designed to reverse the seemingly unstoppable tide of conquest. Their combined forces achieved a series of stunning victories, pushing deep into Ottoman-held territory. For a brief, triumphant period, they reclaimed swaths of Serbia and even parts of Bulgaria, proving that the Sultan's armies were not invincible. The chronicles of the time record the soaring hopes as fortress after fortress returned to Christian control, a powerful demonstration of what could be achieved through unified action. Yet the strength of the Ottoman Empire was merely gathering itself. The inevitable counter-offensive was overwhelming, and the movement's hard-won gains were gradually reclaimed. The final, symbolic shift occurred a decade later with the Ottoman capture of Constantinople in 1453, an event that fundamentally changed the balance of power in the region. Despite this outcome, Branković's movement left a vital legacy. It was a fleeting glimpse of a different future for the Balkans, a path where coordinated resistance could successfully challenge an emerging empire. This struggle highlights a crucial dimension of medieval statecraft, where the fight for a nation's soul was often played out on a vast geopolitical stage, its outcomes shaped by distant thrones and the shifting allegiances of powerful neighbors. A city's own streets could become a battlefield, even without a single soldier in sight. The Kingdom of Majorca in 1391 was a place of tense coexistence, where Christian, Jewish, and Muslim communities lived in a delicate balance under royal protection. This fragile peace shattered when Christian mobs turned their fury on the Jewish quarters. On the surface, this violence seemed driven by religious fervor, a sudden explosion of ancient prejudice. But look closer, and a more complex rebellion emerges. The rioters were not only attacking a religious minority, they were lashing out against the crown itself. The monarchy had long upheld a policy of protection for Jewish communities, who played vital roles as officials, physicians, and financiers. To the artisans and laborers struggling with economic uncertainty, this royal policy felt like an alliance between the powerful and a group they could easily target. The mobs in burning and looting these neighborhoods were directly challenging the king's authority, and the economic elites they felt had abandoned them. The unrest began in the capital, Poma, a bustling port city where social tensions simmered just below the surface. From there, the fire of rebellion spread rapidly to other towns across the islands, a chain reaction of chaos that the royal government proved helpless to stop. The result was a profound transformation of the kingdom's very fabric. Faced with overwhelming turmoil, many Jewish individuals chose conversion, while others were lost in the upheaval. The once vibrant, multi-confessional society was irrevocably broken, its economic networks left in disarray. This tragic chapter reveals a difficult truth about medieval power. Rebellion was not always a march for freedom or a list of political demands. It could also be a destructive, chaotic force, a popular uprising that targeted the most vulnerable as a way to strike at the institutions that seemed to uphold an unjust order. The smoke over the quarters of Majorca was a stark signal that a king's power was only as strong as his ability to maintain the peace among his own people, a lesson that would echo far beyond the Mediterranean shores. Yet the spark of rebellion requires dry tinder to become a blaze. Why did these challenges to authority erupt with such force across the medieval world? The answer lies in a society under immense and sustained pressure, a perfect storm of hardship and change. Consider the sheer weight of numbers. After the Great Plague swept through Europe, the population slowly began to recover, but the available land did not. More people competing for the same resources meant higher food prices and lower wages for laborers, creating a deep well of economic frustration. At the same time, kings and lords demanded ever higher taxes to fund their endless conflicts, like the long struggle of the 100 Years' War. For a peasant already struggling to feed a family, a royal tax collector represented a profound threat, taking the very means of survival. This was not just an economic system, but a social one, the rigid feudal hierarchy. Your place in life was largely determined by birth, with little hope of advancement. The nobility held the land and the power, while the vast majority worked the land with no share in its bounty or the laws that governed it. This lack of mobility and justice created a simmering resentment, a quiet belief that the entire structure was fundamentally unfair. Then came the great shattering of religious certainty. When the church, the bedrock of medieval life, fractured during the papal schism with rival spiritual leaders opposing each other, and later when reformers like Wycliffe and Hus questioned its very authority, it gave people a new language and a moral justification to challenge not just their priest but their prince. This spiritual unrest provided a powerful ideology for rebellion. Meanwhile, the world was changing in other profound ways. The growth of towns and the rise of a money economy created new wealthy merchants and artisans who had power through wealth, not birth. They increasingly resented a noble class that looked down on them yet depended on their riches. In the crowded city streets, this also created a new class of urban poor, laborers who lived in cramped conditions and were highly susceptible to the speeches of radical preachers and the calls of reformers. All these threads, the economic strain, the social rigidity, the religious upheaval, and the shifting urban landscape, wove together into a complex web. A single injustice, a new tax, a personal dispute could snap one thread and the entire structure would tremble. These rebellions were not random acts of chaos. They were the logical, almost inevitable outcome of a system that placed too much strain on too many people for far too long. From the muddy fields of Flanders to the mountains of Wales, these 25 uprisings reveal a medieval world that was far from static or quietly accepting. They were moments where ordinary and extraordinary people dared to imagine a different world and struggled, often against impossible odds, to make it real. While most were ultimately overcome, their influence did not simply fade away. It lived on in changed laws, in shaken institutions, and most importantly, in the enduring memory of those who stood together, passed down through generations. These events forced rulers to the negotiating table, to make concessions and sometimes to recognize the collective strength of their own people. The historian Eamon Duffy noted that popular action reveals the inner world of the common people, and these movements give us a priceless window into that world of hope, determination, and profound aspiration. They show us that the desire for dignity and a voice is a timeless human impulse. As we reflect on these powerful stories of courage and remembrance, we invite you to consider which uprising you find most compelling. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for joining this journey through the events that almost changed everything.